Well, good morning to everyone who's joined. It looks like we have some more people joining, but we're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is David, and I'll be your host today, and welcome to another one of DocuTech's compliance panels. We're excited to have this compliance panel today. We've got some great information for you guys and some great questions that have come in. For those of you that haven't been to one of our compliance panels, we started these because we knew that there was a need in the industry today for some answers to some complicated compliance questions. So that's what we did, is we wanted to start a webinar to answer some of those complicated questions. But before we get started, I wanted to show everyone some things that have changed on our website really quick. We've just unleashed our new blog on our website. And so if you're seeing my screen right now, if you see this section right here, our blog, you click on that, we'll be having some great articles published on there from some people here at DocuTech. It's a fantastic way to kind of keep up to date on some news and some things that are trending right now. And the old blog has actually changed to a document center right here. So if you have any questions on compliance, you can go to our document center. There's some great resources there. That was our old blog, and we just recently changed it to the new one. So check those out if you have a second on our website. And without taking up too much of the time, I'm going to introduce the team here at DocuTech, the compliance team.
We've got Anne-Marie Poirier, who's a compliance specialist here at DocuTech. Tad Sakota, who is a compliance specialist at DocuTech. Amanda McMurtry, who is also a compliance specialist, and then Daniel Royce, who is a compliance attorney, and then myself, Fred Gooch. I'm DocuTech's General Counsel and Vice President of Compliance. And so we'll be going through some questions that have been submitted, and also some things that we're kind of seeing that are common questions or common issues that we're seeing coming into our department for research. So what we will do is we will start off with a couple of questions that we received prior to the webinar here. And so the first one that we have here is, it talks about, the question was, under TRID, are escrow advance credits held to any tolerance? For instance, FHA Streamline, we are crediting escrows to limit short to close. The credit we disclose is greater than what is needed to cover escrow account. Are we held to any tolerance in lowering the credit on the CD? Now, this is one of those areas that's not directly addressed by the rule. And so when we're talking about these kind of credits, the closest thing that I could find and that would be analogous to this situation would be just a general lender credit under the rule. I can't see any kind of an exception for any other type of a credit that would be given for a lender in this circumstance. So if we just look at the rule for a general lender credit, which is probably what this would be considered, unless we've got more information, the lender credits are subject to the general good faith variance rule under TRID. Now, TRID redefined what good faith means, and for the purposes of your tolerances, good faith means that there is zero tolerance. And so if you look at the official interpretation to 1026.19 E3 Romanet 1.5, it talks specifically about lender credits. And the rule states that the actual amount of the commentary states that the actual amount of lender credits, whether specific or non-specific, provided by the creditor, that is less than the estimated lender credits identified in 37 G6 Romanet 2, which is on the loan estimate, and disclosed pursuant to 19E, is an increased charge to the consumer for the purposes of determining good faith under 1026.19 E3 Romanet 1, which is the general rule, meaning good faith, zero tolerance. So the best that I can determine specifically to answer this question is that those credits would be considered a lender credit and would be subject to a zero tolerance under the rule. And so that's where you would end up on there. Now, we do have a couple of just general questions that have come in here to the webinar. The first one is, will the webinar recording be available? David.
And I can answer that for you, Fred. Yes, the webinar recording will be available. We will go ahead and get that done today and send that out. That will be on our website, so you can go ahead and check that out. And we'll also send out a follow-up email that'll give you links to that. And then there was a question that came in that says, does this change the RSS feeds that we might currently have set yet? This actually doesn't, because we haven't changed the actual website. We just added on a new blog site to our website. So, but if anything does ever happen to your RSS feed and you're not receiving those feeds, or you feel like you're not getting the updates, please feel free to reach out to our marketing team at marketing@docutech.com. So back to you, Fred.
Okay, on to the next exciting question here. The question is, if a borrower overpays the appraisal fee prior to closing, how would you reflect the overpayment on the CD? Please advise in regard to both formats. So this is also another question of, unfortunately, the TRID rule just doesn't address every single question that's out there, and so this isn't directly addressed in the rule either. But there are a couple of options here. I think that option 1 is probably the best, but option 2 would also be another option that you might be able to look at. And this is just some options that I've thought of that you might be able to utilize. Option 1 would be to disclose the actual amount in the borrower paid before closing column on page 2 of the CD, and then issue a credit back in the amount of the overpayment to the consumer as a lender credit in section J. So you would you would still list you would list the amount that the borrower paid, and then credit it back to the borrower as a lender credit in J. Another option that you might be able to use that I've seen out there also is to disclose the amount of the overpayment in section L on the CD in the other credit section to credit back the amount that was overpaid. The problem here would be that approach couldn't work using the alternative form, because there is no the summary of transaction section does not appear there. So you couldn't use that in the other one. So, I think in most circumstances, probably option 1 is better, and that's what I've seen out there, and would probably be permissible under the rule. However, once again, this isn't directly addressed in the rule. So we're going to move on to another question that we've had related to TRID, and we're going to have Amanda discuss a question that talks, something that we've seen actually a lot of interest here at DocuTech in, I would say, in the last month or so, which is about corrections to the closing disclosure post-consummation, right?
Right. The questions that came in was, can a CD be corrected after closing for the loan calculation table on page 5? The reg provides that if during the first 30 days after consummation, something in connection with the settlement occurs that causes the CD to be inaccurate and results in a change to the amount actually paid by the consumer or seller, the creditor needs to correct the CD and send it out no later than 30 days after figuring out there was a change. The event could be that the recorder's fee differs from what was previously disclosed and would change the amount that is actually paid by the consumer. Another one would be the transfer tax owed to the state differs from what was previously disclosed and would result in an increase to the amount that was actually paid by the consumer. Another example could be that there is an unpaid assessment that was not disclosed, which would result in a change that was actually paid by the seller. So to answer the question, yes, if anything within 30 days changes the amount the consumer will pay or the amount that the seller will pay, which would affect the amounts that are disclosed on the table in page 5, the CD would need to be corrected.
Okay. Thank you. Now we have a question that is actually not directly related to TRID, which would actually existed prior to TRID, but we've had a lot of questions come in recently about the use of the H8 and the H9 model forms in the notice of right to cancel and rescission situations. Daniel.
Right. This issue actually goes back a little further than TRID. Some of these cases that we collected actually go back into the early 90s. And what we're talking about specifically can be found in Appendix H to Part 1026, the closed-end model forms and clauses. H8 is the general rescission form, and H9 is the rescission form for a refinancing with the original creditor. One of the cases actually distinguished these two forms really well. H8 discloses that the borrower is entering into a transaction that will result in a security interest in your home. But H9 provides that you are entering into a new transaction to increase the amount of credit previously provided to you. The second difference is that H9 adds a sentence, if you cancel this new transaction, it will not affect any amount that you presently owe. Because of the questions that came in, we kind of looked over the way our system handles this. And the way that the different circuits, federal circuits, have decided what the language means and how it should be handled. And surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, there's a circuit split. One of the circuits says that you have to give the H9 or H8 form specifically. So if it's a refinancing, you have to give, with the original creditor, you have to give H9. One of the circuits said that if you give both forms, that it violates the Truth in Lending Act's clear and conspicuous disclosure language requirements. And 3 or 4 of the circuits say that it really doesn't matter. As long as you give one of them, the general form, the language is specific to this transaction or the transaction in front of you. And a lot of the cases, besides the ones that made it to federal court, there were hundreds of cases at the state level. And of course, they decided which case they wanted to follow to make sure that we are giving all of our clients the most protection possible. We've gone through our system and made sure that we have a field labeled, oddly enough, is this a refinance with the original creditor? And if you send us yes, the H9 form will print. If you select no, or if you leave it blank, the H8 form will print. Now, while in most states, most circuits, that won't be seen as a violation, we've made sure that the system won't print both H8 and H9. And we've provided the mechanism so that you can select or send us the information so that the H9 form prints. That way we can make sure that you get the most protection and run into the least amount of trouble.
Okay, sounds good. An old question, but a good question, I guess.
And one that I don't see getting resolved until somebody decides that they want the Supreme Court to weigh in.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be the one to have to argue that one, but that's just me.
Yeah, and so the system is set up to intelligently, at least our system, if the information is passed to us, whether to utilize an H8 or an H9 form, the system will be able to determine whether to provide H8 or H9, right?
Correct.
And so if the information isn't given to us, then it will normally default to a situation where H8 would be automatically selected, but if you have the view-only functionality in the software available to you, you would be able to view the H9 and select it and print it if you wanted to. Correct?
If you wanted to, but you have to make that affirmative selection so that we're just making sure that both forms can't be printed and included in a package, because that's the one instance where they said that was a violation of TILA, and then it extended the rescission period from 3 days to 3 years.
Yeah, which nobody wants, right?
No.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Daniel. Another issue that's been coming up quite frequently, and I know that Anne-Marie's been working on an article on this that we're going to publish on our website as well, but the issue really deals with rounding. And with so many different numbers and percentages being disclosed on the closing disclosure and the loan estimate, we're getting a lot of questions, and even questions from investors about inconsistencies and rounding and truncating and how many decimals. And so we're working on an article to clarify our position on all of these issues. So we're going to have Anne-Marie take a few minutes and give a summary of the information related to how's all the rounding work on the TRID disclosures.
And it's really simple to figure out. Actually, all of the rounding rules for the loan estimate and the closing disclosure can be found in 1026-3704 and 1026-38T4, respectively. And what those basically boil down to is they tell us that unless it's specifically provided for, In these regs, rounding is not permitted in the LE and CD. And where guidance is absent for the closing disclosure on how to round, then the guidance is to be found in the sections that deal with the loan estimate. What I find a little funny about that is that unless it's specifically provided for, you shouldn't be rounding, but basically what it boils down to is most everything in the loan estimate is rounded, and most everything in the closing disclosure is not rounded. But obviously it isn't as simple as that, and so that's the reason why we have these questions, so we can try and get down to basics and figure out what those rules are. So with the loan estimate, here are quite a few of the sections that are rounded, and we have all of these rules listed in 1026-3704 Romanet 1A, and it lists some of the sections like adjustments after consummation, which would be the adjustment in the loan amount, the adjustment in the interest rate, and the increase in the periodic payment. The details about the prepayment penalty and the balloon payment, which are the maximum amounts for those. The projected payments for the range of payments, the mortgage insurance, the estimated escrow, the estimated total monthly payment. And with the estimated total monthly payment, this is one of those that's a little squirrely because the only thing that is rounded on that are the components of that. So the actual amount is supposed to remain unrounded, but when you start doing the calculations are supposed to be rounded, and I'm going to circle back around to that in a moment. Also, all of Section A, Section B, Section C, and Section D, which are the closing cost details. All of Section E, Section F, Section H, Section I, Section J, which is the closing cost detail for other costs. And also the calculating cash to close, the adjustable payment table, and the comparisons. All of these sections in the loan estimate are to be rounded. For the closing disclosure, the items that are to be rounded basically mirror whatever was supposed to be rounded in the loan estimate. So the amounts that you are transferring over from the loan estimate to the closing disclosure, especially in the calculating cash to close and calculating the alternative table and the regular table, all of the sections there on the closing disclosure that in the column that say loan estimate section, those are supposed to be the exact rounded amounts that are transferred from the loan estimate to the closing disclosure. So because we're dealing with dollar amounts so far in this section and not percentages, we need to go back and find out what the rule is for rounding the dollar amounts. And in those, it's your basic math. So if anything is 50 cents or over, then you round up, and anything that is below 50 cents, then you would round down. When I said I'd circle back to rounding the total monthly payment, in section 1026-3704 Romanet 1C, it requires that the total monthly payment be disclosed as rounded. So the example that is given in the official interpretation is that if the total monthly payment disclosed is composed of a periodic principal and interest payment of $2,000.49, and the periodic mortgage insurance payment is $164.49, then the creditor would calculate the total monthly payment by adding the exact amounts that I just gave you, which is the $2,000.49, and then the rounded periodic mortgage insurance payment of $164 because the example gives you less than 50 cents. And then you would round and total that to disclose $2,164. So you use one unrounded amount and one rounded amount to get a sum, which is a rounded amount. And then what we have listed are the dollar amounts that are unrounded. And the dollar amounts that are unrounded for both the LA and the CD are the per diem amounts, and then the initial escrow payment amounts of homeowners insurance, mortgage insurance, and property taxes. So now I'm going to move on to percentages.
Hey, hold on one moment there, Anne.
Oh,
We're
okay.
getting a lot of questions in here about whether there are any slides. We only had slides for the questions that were submitted in advance of the webinar, so there are no slides for this part of the presentation. But we will be distributing the article about rounding that will give you all more information that you can read and follow up on the rounding information that Anne Marie is discussing right now. So there are no slides going forward for the rest of the webinar.
And I apologize for that because I know that this seems a little murky. So hopefully once this article is published, it'll be a little bit easier to understand. But now that I've dealt with the dollar amounts, I'm going to move on to percentages. And the percentages that are required to be unrounded are the interest rate, the adjustment in the interest rate, the origination charges, which is the percentage of loan amounts, points, the prepaid interest, which is per diem, the adjustable interest rate table, and the total interest percentage. Oh, and also the annual percentage rate. The reason why I had that kind of segregated on its own is because the rule reads that it shall not be rounded, and these percentages shall be disclosed up to 2 or 3 decimal places. All of those percentage rates that I listed, aside from the annual percentage rate, are to be disclosed up to 2 or 3 decimal places. The annual percentage rate is to be disclosed up to 3 decimal places. So how does this translate to what we have programmed in ConformX? Because some of these rules say that they can be disclosed up to 2 or 3, the system default that we have is that if a client chooses to disclose up to 2, then it will truncate to 2. And if they decide to disclose up to 3, then it will round to 3. And if we have any trailing zeros, the way that the ConformX program default is in place right now is that if there if you have a percentage rate that is 3.170, then the trailing third zero will disappear. But if you have a percentage rate that is 3.10, then the second decimal point, which is a trailing zero, will remain. So there will always be at least 2 decimal points that are disclosed, whether there's a trailing zero or not. And the other thing that we have in ConformX, which has been newly added, is that there's been some question about how to calculate the per diem, because even though per diem is not supposed to be rounded, many times the per diem calculation exceeds 2 decimal points. So if it exceeds 2 decimal points, our system is now going to allow the client to choose whether to truncate the per diem calculation or to round it, because we have noticed, depending on what LOS you're using, that sometimes we're off by a penny, depending on whether they choose to truncate or round.
Okay. So once again, there will be an article forthcoming on our compliance blog that will spell out all of those rules in more detail. Everyone loves to talk about and read about rounding, so we're just going to continue to give you some information there to hopefully quench that insatiable appetite for rounding information. Once again, we're still getting some questions about the slides. We only had PowerPoint slides for the questions that were submitted to us in advance, so there are no more slides. That's why you're just seeing a site from our website right now. Tad is going to now give us an update on what's going on with Pennsylvania security instruments.
Thank you, Fred. As you all know, many of you all know, that Fannie Mae has made recent changes to their Pennsylvania security instruments, and they made these changes based off of a court case, and the court case is called EMC Mortgage LLC versus Biddle. And the court here, the the question that they addressed is that whether or not mortgage provisions will survive a foreclosure proceeding, or whether or not they will actually merge into the foreclosure judgment. The answer that the court came up with was that if the mortgage and the note had specific language that addressed that it would survive after the judgment, then it would survive. And based off of this, Fannie Mae made the security instrument changes to the Pennsylvania security instruments. Also, here at DocuTech, we also think that this case doesn't just apply to the Fannie Mae security instruments, but also to all mortgage security instruments and their notes. And so we are in process of making those changes, and we will be getting them out as soon as we can.
Well, do you recall what the effective date was for this Fannie Mae change?
I believe it was around August 1st.
August 1st. So our instruments will be updated well in advance of that.
Yes,
you'll
that's
see an
correct.
update come out on the document update, and have the ability to test them prior to them going into production, just like any other document change that we would make here. But that's kind of the background behind the upcoming changes to the Pennsylvania security instruments. We do have some questions that have come in, but we are out of time. We're keeping these webinars kind of short and sweet and doing them every month for about 30 minutes. So what we will do is we will address the questions that have come in that we haven't talked about on this webinar in the next webinar. Thank you for your participation, and keep sending your questions. These compliance panels are only as good as the questions that are sent in to us. So if you have questions, we'd love to address them. Send them in to legal@docutechcorp.com, and or just in through your account manager, and we'd be happy to address those questions. Once again, thanks, and here's David.
Thank you so much, Fred, and thank you guys to the legal compliance team. We really appreciate you guys getting on and giving us all that information. It's always very helpful, and thank you to all of our attendees today. Again, if you have any questions, please send us an email at legal@docutech.com, or you're more than welcome to call us at 800-497-3584, and we will see you next time on the next compliance panel. Thanks so much.